starting it or
Take
you
it away.
starting it?
Yeah, you take it away.
All right, welcome back to the Matchbox. We got a good friend of mine, Michael Seiler, as a guest on today. Me and Michael go back way back. I think the biggest thing with you, I almost want to call you Mr. Seiler still, because
It's hard to get out of that.
days of. So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. So I don't know if you've been around the cycling scene in Louisville ever since I was a junior, primarily helping out with some of the junior cyclocross teams, which I was also very much involved in. And but I think the biggest way that me and you got connected was when I started coaching. I remember texting you. I must have texted you 20 different times, like, do you have an LLC? Do you have a bank account? Like all those nitty-gritty questions of starting your own coaching company, because I think you had gone through that process a year or two before I was going through it. Yeah. So I was texting you all these random questions, like company car, like I don't just random stuff of like and you were very gracious in helping me get my own coaching off the ground and starting that process, all the little things. And so I feel like through that we really kind of got to, I don't know, grow a little closer, because now not only were you coaching before, but now like we're coaching alongside each other, which is pretty cool, in the same town. And we always had a very good relationship. Like I've never seen you as a competitor, even though you are a coach for a different, like you do your own coaching and I do my own coaching, but it's always been super cool to have like somebody else right here in Louisville that's coaching and that I can ask questions and all that.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge in the coaching industry, which I wish didn't exist, is this feeling of competitiveness. And, you know, my philosophy, my coaching partner's philosophy is that I'm not the right coach for everybody. I do think everybody should have a coach. I know that sounds self-serving, but, you know, what I'm going to work well with a certain person. And if it's not working well, I always tell people, it's like, if it's not working, let's just have that conversation. I know other coaches that you might want to talk to. The goal is to help somebody grow and develop as much as they possibly can or want to. If I can do that, great. If not, let me help find you somebody that's going to help you achieve your goals. You know, similarly, like I've done triathlons, but I'm not a swimming coach. So if you're looking for a swimming coach, I'll help you find one, but I'm not the person for you. And I do love being able to talk to other coaches. I mean, I listen to your all's podcast, and you know, there's things I don't pretend to know it all, and I'm always learning. And so it could come from another coach, could come from a book, but this whole competitiveness, I don't think serves the coaching industry very well.
That's how we got onto this topic, because you texted me last week and was like, it's kind of funny when one of my athletes quotes your podcast.
Right. Sends me your podcast.
Yeah, sends me.
What do you think of this? Oh, those guys.
Those guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, something that I've always appreciated that we've done at Ignition is the intro call. You know, so before an athlete signs on with any specific coach, we have them do an introductory call with, you know, one or multiple coaches. And I always end my intro calls with the statement of, look, this is a relationship that's really important. You want to make sure that you're getting into a relationship that you feel confident in, you feel comfortable with. And if this isn't the right one for you, like if you can just tell from, you know, this 30-minute intro call that this isn't, you know, quite the, you know, communication response you're looking for or the coaching philosophy you're looking for, interview other coaches. You know, it's really important, I think, you know, as an athlete is going through that process to talk with multiple coaches. And whether that's, I always tell them too, like, you don't have to you know, it doesn't have to be with an Ignition. Like, sorry, Drew, but you know, I tell them, like, if there's other coaching companies out there that have a different coaching philosophy than what we portray, it's important to just explore your options and see what you think is going to work best for you. And at the end of the day, if you come back to me and say, hey, you know, I really feel comfortable with you, then great. You know, I'm you know, would love to work with you, but I want to make sure that they're comfortable in that relationship before we get started, because it's super important, you know, that you're putting a lot of trust and confidence in that person. And if you can't do that honestly, then it's just going to kind of get started on a bad foot.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we do similarly a discovery call, and I tell them up front, hey, this is an interview. You're interviewing me. I'm interviewing you.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we can work together. And I used to bridge right into like get the decision on the phone. Like, do you want to? And felt like there was too much inertia and created an awkward kind of moment for them. So I literally say, I'm going to send you a couple documents and I want you to think about it. And if
Yep.
you send me those documents back, that's your sign that let's move forward. But it also gives me an opportunity to think through and say, do I feel like I can work with this person? And so it does give that ability for both people to say, yeah, I think let's move forward, or this isn't the right fit.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you're coaching and you're doing bike fits. Are those the two big things you're doing?
Yeah. So we can do a little bit of the backstories. So about 8 years ago, probably like the two of you, when I look back, I've probably been coaching all my life, whether it was kids soccer, uh, adult soccer, other sports, or people would come and say, hey, I saw you ran that marathon. Could you help me run a marathon? And so I'd build them a training plan and say, here you go. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I was like, wait a minute, there's people that get paid for this. I mean, I'm paying a coach right now. So I launched a company called Stage 22 Performance. I had also gotten my bike fit certification around the same time. And so I was coaching and doing bike fits. Fast forward to about almost 3 years ago, my coach approached me about partnering together. And so we formed Meta Performance, and we handle running, cycling, multi-sport coaching. My business partner is a former professional triathlete. But I've continued to do the bike fitting under Stage 22 Performance. And I've had Drew in the stand a couple times. But it's just something for me that when I got my first bike fit, like a light bulb went on. I was like, oh, it's not supposed to suck all the time when you're riding your bike? Oh, okay. This pain in my neck isn't supposed to be happening. So I became really interested in just how our body moves the machine that we love to ride. And so I've been doing bike fits now for about 8 years. Went through the Serata certification, bike fitting, and just love working with, I get age groupers, I get people that got a new bike, I got high-end elite racers coming in and getting in the stand. So I've continued to do that since I started, and it's been a lot of fun.
The coolest part about getting a bike fit with Siler is at some point during the bike fit, he'll dim the lights and he busts out these lasers. And you're like, oh, which kind of leads me into a question. I see these bike fitters that have all these, they'll glue these dots to people. I don't know all the terms, but like, I guess a good opening question is, what is your protocol for a bike fit? I know the lasers, but I don't know exactly what they do or what you did with them when you shined them at me. But just give us an overview of your process, I guess.
Sure. So we start when they come in with fit, and we probably spend the first 30 or so minutes. I want to get an understanding of what their riding background is, if they've got any history of injuries. It's really, I'm kind of gathering facts so that once I do get them on the bike, I start to know what to look at, things to watch for. For example, somebody's got a hip replacement. Well, I'll need to make sure that I take that into account as we do the fit. We talk about the goals for their fit. Are they someone that, like Drew, that wants to be as aero as possible, as fast as possible, or are they somebody that just wants to enjoy riding their bike more, so they want something more comfortable? So I want to understand the goals that they want to get out of the fit. Then we move actually into getting them on the bike, and they spend probably Probably about an hour at least. A lot of spinning. People are often surprised by how much time they. I've even had people who will treat it as a workout. They're like, "Well, I had to spin a day anyway."
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a lot of just getting feedback, watching, looking at different angles, getting out the lasers to look at things like how are their knees tracking, um, are they going straight up and down, are they bowing out, and it's then just asking questions about how they feel, what they notice, and then we just the analogy I always use is like going to the eye doctor, where they do the little thing and they're like, is this better or is this better? So we're raising the saddle, lowering the saddle until we find that where that give me the thumbs up that feels good. There are a lot of fitters that use a lot of the technology, like Retool is probably the most well-known technology out there. I don't do that. That's an investment I haven't felt I needed to do. And I do think that listening, asking the right questions, listening, and watching,
Yep.
are more important. The technology will say, we've looked at data across thousands and thousands of bike fits, and these are the numbers the ranges. But I need to hear from the person, like, this feels great. This feels so much better. Oh, my neck pain's gone. The technology is not going to tell me that. It's going to speed me up, if anything, like get me to the answers quicker, but I still need to see with my own eyes, hear what they have to say. The whole process, if we're doing like a road fit, it's like 2.5 hours. If it's a time trial bike, we're pushing 3 hours to get there. Just as you know, there's more to adjust on a trial bike and things to think about.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the what's the phrase?
Nail on the proverbial head.
Head of the nail on the coffin, something like that.
Yeah.
When you talking about like Retool, so I'm Retool certified. I've done hundreds of Retool bike fits. And a big mistake that I think a lot of bike fitters make when they are certified in some of the different fit technologies is they treat that technology like it's superior to what their own intuition is.
Yeah.
Whereas I try to come in as, it's a tool that I can use. It's Retool. It's like a tool that I can use to help give me guidance. But like you said, it's the communication throughout the process is fundamental.
Sure.
You have to have that constant communication. You have to have that feedback loop of making this. And I think one of the biggest things that athletes come to find out when they go in for a bike fit is how small adjustments can make huge impacts too. You're talking a couple millimeters here and there, and it can make, a world of a difference with, how someone feels, how their hips are, functioning and knees are tracking and things like that. I'm curious, do you include any kind of like pre-fit, biomechanical assessment at all?
Yep. So before we get on the bike, I want to look at things like hip, hamstring mobility. And we talk about that and get measurements to see where they're, if they've got any hip issues or, because as we get them on the bike, as if there's something, lack of hip mobility, and I think we're going to probably get into shorter crank arms here in a bit.
Yeah.
That's where I might want to start looking at, hey, let's look at crank arm length, because you've got some, you're a little comprised in your hip mobility. And that's one of the biggest things I see with a lot of folks is just that lack of, regular mobility work, which then just causes you problems on the bike. You're not as efficient or effective.
For sure.
All right. Well, now what?
Well, so Drew, you mentioned that Michael, you wanted to maybe touch on like top 5 common, whether it's self bike fit, setups or whatever, or just common mistakes that people make when they're coming to you and have their bike set up.
Yeah, and knowing that you've done a bunch of bike fits, I'll be interested to see whether you agree with this list or would throw anything else onto that list.
Sure.
So number 5 on the list, I just mentioned, It's really just a lack of regular mobility work throughout the day. And it's probably because I've gotten older, and I'm starting to notice, it takes a little more effort to get out of the couch. But that regular mobility work, I'll give you a quick example. My daughter, who races, this was years ago, wanted me to put her in this super aggressive time trial fit. And I was like, I can't get you there. You don't have enough mobility in your hips for me to get you where you want to go. So she spent a good 6-8 months of just getting after the mobility, and we were able to get her to that position, get her much more aero. So folks, it doesn't take much, 10 minutes a day. Mobility work's the flossing of athletics. We all know we should do it, and yet we don't do it.
Dylan's not here, but he's done videos on stretching, and stretching is in the bandwidth of mobility, right? Stretching.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I tend to stray away from the word stretching because people immediately think of gym class and the static stretching. I'm much more a fan of especially sports specific mobility work that's going to work the things that you're going to need to be good at your sport.
Yeah. But Dylan's like very quick to say, it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't make you stronger. And I think Dylan makes this mistake often where first of all he looks at is science, which is like, you have to like take it with a grain of salt because that's not the real world. And he's done a video on stretching, and at the end of the video, he says that it doesn't increase performance, but it also doesn't decrease from performance. But from what you're saying, it might not directly increase performance, but if it can have a positive effect on the mobility of your hips, say, and you can get into a more aggressive position, well, then it has a like a domino effect or a downstream effect of, well, now it is increasing your performance because now you can ride aero and ride, I'm assuming, more powerfully. And so like, stretching might not increase your 20-minute FTP 2 weeks later, but just in the example of your daughter, like, she was able to get into a more aggressive position because of that mobility work, like downstream.
And you think of, if you can't get your glutes to activate, whether you're cycling or running, because you don't have good mobility, it's going to affect your power. It's going to affect your running speed. And that's the type of mobility. That's why static stretching, I'm not a huge fan, but mobility work, movement, that is helping me access those positions that I need to, even if I'm in the gym, making sure that I can, get into a deep enough squat so that I can get stronger by lifting heavier weights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you've seen a pretty big shift in, pre-exercise or pre-race routines too. 20 years ago, you probably saw a lot of static stretching on the start line. People just, stretching their calves, stretching their hamstrings, stretching their quads. And I think there is some research to show that certain amount of static stretching can actually be a detriment to performance, both running and cycling. And what you've seen a shift to is more, pre-exercise activation work, mobility work, where you're trying to just recruit those muscles, preemptively to start your workout and warm up that way. And like you're talking about, like the downstream effects of that, the compounding effects of that from doing that diligently time over time is where you really start to see the benefits.
Yeah, I see more and more people whipping out
the bands,
resistance bands.
Yep.
They'll be next to their car, and instead of like whipping out their rollers to get warmed up, they're whipping out the resistance bands and doing squats. I'm like, what in the world? I haven't got that far.
Haven't gotten there yet?
Yeah, I haven't got there yet.
All right. Number 4 on my list is coming in with their saddle nose pointed too far down. See this a lot. Typically, I don't. It's typically with males. I see it, and so what they get some tenderness in a tender area, and the answer that they think is just, well, I just need to tilt my saddle down, and that causes all sorts of things. All of a sudden, now they're literally sliding off the saddle, so they feel like, oh, I'm always having to push back. Well, right, your saddle's at 5 degrees nose down. You are sliding off the saddle. I think the first fit I ever did, this guy came in and he literally had his saddle down almost 10 degrees. I mean, it came in like this. So that's a big one. I do find, and I don't know about you, Adam, I do find that most people I'd land with the saddle probably somewhere between a half a degree to a degree nose down, versus, I mean, we were taught in certification, you start at level, that's kind of your reference point, and then you go from there. But I just find that we usually end up landing about a half a degree to a degree nose down.
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty similar, and I think part of that is because there's some give and flex in the saddle, and where your contact points are on the saddle is further back in the saddle. So as that saddle flexes and gives a little bit, it's actually kind of neutralizing it. So yeah, but I found the same thing. Usually it's about 1.5 degrees on average is what I find.
Yeah.
And same with my bikes, even. And sometimes it does depend on the saddle too, in the individual, but I pretty rarely go full neutral to start with. It's if I see the saddles, especially if the saddles pointed down, sometimes too much of an extreme is the wrong answer. So
yeah, and like when I am making adjustments, let's say if someone comes in and they're like 4 degrees nose down, they feel like they're telling me, again, it's what they're telling me, the feedback I'm getting. Oh, I feel like I've got a lot of weight on my hands. I feel like I'm always pushing back. Well, I'm not going to go 4 to 0. I want to start to walk it back to the point where they say, oh, it's gone. I don't have that feeling anymore. And then I'll go one more just to make sure.
Yeah.
And then we'll get back to where the sweet spot is.
Yeah. Will you ever, sometimes I'll do this with an athlete too, just to get them to understand, the sensation of what how the saddle is supposed to work. I'll actually have them ride without hands. So just kind of like sitting in an upright position, because you can tell a lot from, if you're not using your hands to stabilize and support you and that saddle's pointed down, your hips are going to rotate. You're going to be sliding off immediately. And sometimes like that's I feel like a feedback reminder for the athlete of like, oh yeah, okay, the saddle's actually not supporting me the way it's supposed to, because you should be able to sit upright with no hands and not have that sensation of like slipping off your saddle.
Correct. I love that. I may steal that idea. That is a great, I mean, it's the minute you sit up, you're like, oh, this either feels good or it doesn't.
Yep.
I had a question
you're going to ask?
Yeah, to measure this, I don't know if I think this is how you told me to measure this. Because seats aren't flat, so you can't just like stick a level on there. And so you put like something straight, like a 2x4 or something. That's what I usually have laying around is a 2x4. Lay a 2x4 on top of your saddle so that it's contacting all points of your saddles, usually the back and the front. And then I think you had me just download an app on my phone, I think, and it's got a level. You could just use your phone. I don't know if there's something more, if that's not a good way to do it, but that's what I was doing. I was laying that piece of wood and then I put my phone on that, and that would tell me the angle that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I used to try to find, measure from like, because we've got a lot of saddles that flare up in the back. And I used to try to find the level spot in the saddle. Instead, I have it's like a little metal plate that has a magnet on it and a level that sits on top of that. And I now just sit it on that saddle because I write down, this is a saddle they're riding on. So I know if they come back and say, hey, I swapped saddles, I'm going to measure again and we're going to get a new number. So I stopped worrying about trying to adjust for the differences in saddles. I just set it on top of there. That's the number. It's just the baseline. If that's what feels good and it's telling me 4 degrees, I'm putting down 4 degrees. They come in, different saddle, we're going to get a new number, and now the number's 2 degrees or 1.5.
Yeah.
I had another question in regard to saddles. Like, I've heard of saddles that you sit on and saddles that you sit in, and so I think the difference there is there's saddles that are flat. So like the physique area is dead flat.
Mm-hmm.
But then the saddle I'm using now is the Specialized Roman, and it has a pretty good little curve to it. I guess the
Yep.
extreme to this would be those ones that what is the one that Scott uses, Adam? The SMP.
SMP,
Cell
yeah.
SMP, yeah.
Yeah, where it's just like it looks like a zigzag. Like you're really sitting in that thing. Are there I don't want to just assume that it depends on the rider, but are there advantages or disadvantages to those two extremes, like dead flat and then a mountaintop, like a big curve that you sit in?
I honestly, it's so individual.
Yeah.
How saddles fit. Even from my own experience, I had physique saddles on every single one of my bikes, and I loved them. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if something changed in my physique or what, but they don't work. So I've switched now to the power saddle by Specialized. Similarly, I see it in females, especially moving from the teenage as they get through puberty. Their body shape changes. So a saddle that worked when they were 13 or 14 might not work when they're 18 or 19. So it is I think it's very personal. I don't think there's an advantage. I mean, the saddle manufacturers will tell you there's advantages, but they're trying to sell saddles. I think the best saddle is the one that works for you, fits well, allows you to ride the bike in relative comfort.
So you can't, somebody comes in for a bike fit, you can give them suggestions, but you can't say like, oh, well, you should really be on this saddle because of the way you sit or the way you, I mean, I don't think you could do that, but maybe you could say, and this is where I'm kind of headed, is like, you can't tell them what saddle to ride, but you can measure their sit bones and say, well, this is the saddle width you should be riding, right? That's pretty important, the width.
Yeah, and I would say, as far as like sit bone width, to me, what I've found at least is if someone has wide sit bone widths, they're more limited in what their options are because they really need a wider saddle that can support those sit bones in the proper location. But if you have narrow sit bones, you can kind of like run the gambit. You can have a wide saddle to a narrow saddle because you're going to find that support position, a lot easier. So that's really the main thing I'm looking for. Like if I measure sit bone width is, does someone have not abnormally wide, but a average to wide sit bone width.
Wow, that just blew my mind. I never thought of that because I think the last time I got my sit bones measured, they said that mine were pretty narrow, like kind of one of the narrowest ones. And so I've been thinking like, man, I really need a narrow saddle, but they don't make saddles that like narrow enough. And so I've just kind of gotten the standard 140, but you're saying as long as your sit bones are on, because my sit bones are narrower, as long as the saddle is wider than my sit bones and has that support, and there's not other issues occurring, and that's good.
To an extent, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's so simple. I don't know why that didn't connect before.
Yeah. Well, getting back to your question about can you say, oh, this saddle is going to work for you? I mean, you're probably in the same boat, Adam. There's some generalities where I can say, hey, my clients that I've worked with, like you, have found success with this. So I can point them in a direction of, you might want to try this, but they really need to try it. And
I would say like the one exception that I've found where, an athlete comes in and I can pretty much guarantee they're going to be on this type of saddle is triathletes. With the extremely, and the fits for triathlon bikes have changed over the years too, or at least the philosophy of it. It used to be very low, very long, trying to get, as low and narrow as possible. It's kind of shifted towards, being a little bit more comfortable. You want to stay in that aero position, but trying to be, just a narrow front end. But regardless, it seems like a lot of triathletes benefit from the type of saddle like the ISM saddles, where it's kind of like a prong nose saddle, just because a lot of times the hip angle is so severely closed that it just provides more relief. Especially for a long period of time, you're not going to get that numbness because triathlon, the most important thing is staying in aero for as long,
As
as
long
much
as
of
you
the bike
can.
as you can, really,
Right.
yeah. So if you start to get numbness or, some pain on, undercarriage, then that just becomes an issue because you're just not going to be able to stay in aero as
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm seeing, um, I do think as more people are getting into, more of the age groupers are getting into triathlon, um, you are seeing a little bit more on I'm seeing the same thing of more on a little more comfort. Like they'll
Yeah.
sacrifice aero for comfort. Um, and we'll often, depending on if they're more of a uh, Olympic distance, uh, but want to move up to triathlon, long course, we might even look at having two different fits
Sure.
where, for Olympic, we can be more aggressive because you're not on the bike as long. Now we move over to half Ironman or full Ironman. We probably want to err a little bit more on let's get you a little more comfortable, so because you're going to be on that bike in that position for 4.5 to 6 hours.
Yep. Right.
Mm.
All right. It's number 3.
Number 3, saddle too low.
Mm.
And I don't know if it's just the people coming to me, but I tend to find that a lot of folks just come in with a saddle too low. But I have one of the things I've recently messed around with, especially relative to gravel, is I am finding that for folks that come to me and say, I'm going to do this long gravel race, I've started actually bringing their saddles down from where I might if they were just doing a road fit. I've experimented with it on myself and found it does give me a little more comfort than if I were to go to my road saddle height. And we're talking millimeters difference, but I do find more often than not I'm raising people's saddles versus dropping them.
Mm.
And that could be my mix of people coming to me. I don't know.
What are you looking at when are you looking at their knee angle or their hip angles? What are the things that you're looking at to get to that ideal seat height?
So the conventional wisdom is, you're looking at knee angle. But other things I'm looking at visually is, are they having to reach to get their, do I see a lot of toe down as they're getting down to the bottom of that pedal stroke, which suggests to me that saddle's too high because they're having to reach to make that distance. The other is, how are they describing their pedaling? Does it feel like they're reaching? Does it feel like, do I have pain in the front or the back of the knees? Those are all things that indicate we need to look at the saddle height. I start with a number based on their height, do an NC measurement, just to at least have a basis. More often than not, we just start with wherever their saddle's set now and move it from there to try to find, what's the most comfortable and most efficient for them.
Yeah, one of the little tricks that I'll use is the visualization of the chain check. So that's what I call it, at least. But if someone's not pedaling efficiently, and you call it like pedaling squares or whatever, where they have a drop off point somewhere in their pedal stroke, you'll see like a little like tick in the chain. Like every pedal stroke, it'll be like just a little bit of movement where it's ticking, ticking, ticking. You're seeing that loss of tension. And then it's really cool when you get them into that, like the right zone for saddle height and position. And all of a sudden that chain tension just stays consistent. You're not seeing that ticking or, lacking chain tension. And it's really cool. And I always love to tell my clients like, hey, check this out, like, and take a video or something like that, before and after, because it's a really good, I think, indicator to be able to observe someone's pedaling efficiency, because it's sometimes hard to pick up on that without like their feedback. And like, I mean, I guess you could maybe try and analyze something like power data, but even that can be challenging. It's so granular.
Yeah.
But the chain is like very telling, I've found, of like, whether or not someone's pedaling efficiently.
Yeah, my variation of that is, so I use one of the feedback sports trainers.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And so they're getting that audio cue of the drums turning. And if
Yep.
it's, so if it's going zzz, zzz, I'm like,
Yeah.
we got something going on here.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I've been using for, not with all my clients, but I will, speaking of tools, is the Leomo. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. Drew, I think we used it with one of your fits just because you were curious about it, but it's these sensors that you can put on their thighs, the tops of their shoes, and either their chest or their sacrum. And they give you angles. But what's great is with the sensors on the feet is they can measure where they have dead spots.
Oh, cool.
In their pedal stroke, and it's a great visual. There's a head unit, so you can actually put that metric in front of them and say, okay, I want you to try to get that to as close to 0 as you can. And it's just a good education tool for them to see a number, feel the feeling, and it's even something I can say, now just take this equipment and go for a ride out on the road so you can replicate that in a real world condition. But it's a great tool for being able to do that, off the stand, so they can go and just see the numbers.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Number 2, handlebars too big. And I blame the bike manufacturers.
You mean as in wide?
As too wide,
yeah.
I would say, that probably, when we get to my number 1, you'll see why that's number 1, but that would probably be my number 1. I've seen even why the reason I say I think I blame it on the bike manufacturers is, I've seen 54 centimeter bikes, like kids come in with 54 centimeter bikes, and they've got like 44 centimeter wide bars. I'm like, I could see that if it was on my bike, 61 centimeter bike, that would make sense. They would assume I've got broad shoulders, but just the really wide. And so it creates, your body is going to want to adapt to that. And you do that by, either turning in the wrists to get your arms in a much straighter position. I had my niece came in for fit, and her body's way to deal with that is she's double jointed in her elbows. So she would just lock her elbows in. So she was getting that more comfortable shoulder angle coming out of your shoulders.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
and
there goes all your suspension. So
exactly. And so, why does my neck hurt? Why does my shoulders hurt? Because everything's going straight through your arms and pounding you. So yeah, too wide handlebars is my number 2 on the list.
Okay. I'm gonna go there. I'm trying to get. This is crazy because you told me during my bike fit, like, you could probably do narrower bars based on and that was one of the things that I didn't want to budge on back then. This was 6 years ago. This was pre marginal gains, Drew. I was like, no, handling. And I think I was racing crits, and you're like, you should go narrower. And I was running like 42 centimeter bars, and I'm not a big guy. And you were like, you could probably go narrower. And I was like, nope, not budging. And since then, I've gone from 42s to 40s. And this year, now I'm going to the other extreme. I'm like, how narrow can I go? I've got some 36s on the way. Because I am like, the more there's so many people trying to go narrower and narrower for the aero advantages. Can you go the other way? Can you go too narrow?
It depends on what you're trying to do. I think if you're primarily racing crits, I would go as narrow as you feel comfortable with, and is not compromising. If you can't hold that position because it's too narrow, because it's pulling your shoulders in and it's uncomfortable. But I would go as narrow as you can. Now, if you're doing, endurance gravel races or even just long rides, I would probably steer more towards something that's more comfortable. Versus the narrow. Because if you just like long rides on the weekends, being arrow is not your goal. So your goal is to be able to ride long on the weekend.
So
So I'd go towards comfort.
there's been this other trend too. I know we're going to talk about some trends coming up. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that one of these trends is your number one. That would just give the people exactly what they want to hear, you know? I also hope that it's not though. One of the trends that I've been seeing a lot lately is stack height coming up so that people can hold a more aero position. Because I think it's pretty well known now that the most aero position, at least on a normal road or gravel setup, is when your hands are in the hoods and your bars are or in your so like the old school thinking was in the drops, but now it's saying if you can get real aero in the hoods and your arms be more at like a 90 degree or flat, like your forearms are flat.
Forearms parallel to the ground. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go. So a way that a lot of people are doing that is they're raising their stack height, which is like when I was growing up, it was like there was the whole slam your stem, and
Right.
forever that's what I thought. You got slam your stem, super negative, cut that steer tube as low as it'll go.
It
But
still
now
looks
you're
way
seeing
cooler.
it does look way cooler. But now you're seeing people do the other thing, like where the stack height's coming higher, because if you can get your arms in that position and you can hold that position for longer, it could be more aero. Like I even saw a little clip of a guy who was saying his aero position is now in his hoods and his handling position or his comfort position is in his drops. And growing up, that was the total opposite for me. For me, it
Right.
was in the hoods is for comfort and handling. And then when I get aero, I drop down into my drops. And he was doing the exact opposite because then the stack height has come higher. And I was like, that's interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But.
Well, when it comes to aerodynamics, I mean, what we're managing is the frontal area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how much of your body is creating drag. You know, for example, and there's some things that I have zero control over as a fit. I can't control the width of your hips.
Mm.
I can manipulate the width of your shoulders by bringing you in so that they're kind of rolled over. But that's what we're trying to manage, is the surface area that's hitting the wind. And you go to a wind tunnel, that's what they're measuring, is that drag coefficient of the front of your body. So bringing you in is going to make you more aero, and then it's going to be more comfortable. Drops versus bars, I mean, if you're, I don't know, you'd really have to then look at that position to see the difference between, am I really being more aero by being in my drops?
Yeah.
Over, I can still get pretty low and be comfortable by having those forearms parallel and everything at a 90-degree angle.
Yeah, I think what they've found and measured is when you're in your drops, your arms are going to be straighter, and just that the angle of those straight arms being more I guess direct opposition to the air the slipstream, then that's creating more drag. Whereas when you're in the quote unquote aero position on the hoods, you've got less exposed frontal area of the arms, so you're kind of like everything's tucked in a little bit more. So it's and I think in like we've seen this with TT positions even in World Tour and the Tour de France and stuff like that, where guys are raising their front end a little bit but really getting narrow, trying to get those shoulders tucked in and trying to get as basically as narrow as they can, and less about getting as low as they can, which used to always be the rule of thumb, was just if you get lower, you're going to be more aero, you're going to be better off, and I think there's kind of a merging of desires, which is power output, trying to be have more efficient power distribution in the TT position, but also combining that with a small frontal area. And they've just found that you can create that same small frontal area by going taller and narrower, but then that opens up your hips and better power distribution. And I think that's kind of what's carrying over to the gravel scene now, is it's aerodynamics has become so critical in gravel racing. You're out there for longer, you're not getting as much of a draft because you can't, I mean, you can, but it's a lot higher risk to be as close, closer to the wheels in front of you. So you're just seeing more emphasis placed on aerodynamics, and they're kind of trying to carry that same concept over of like, if I can get tall and narrow, I can hold that position more while still being able to put out, higher power distribution.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge with especially TT bikes is, I mean, we're putting people in impossible positions. And, that's why that's really part of the reason why I think you see the shorter cranks migrating over into road racing is, I can now not have my hips as impinged as they were. Because that's where we always go with triathletes is like, okay, well, let's put you on shorter cranks so that your hips are not as compromised and you're able to get aero and still, be able to produce power.
Yeah.
Is that number one?
No, number one, not getting a fit.
Oh, yeah.
Curveball.
I would say, I know when I was getting certified, the industry metric was something like, I don't know, 10% or 15% of people get a bike fit of bike owners. And I think part of it is that people go to the bike shop, they buy the bike, and what the shop typically does is they do a bike sizing.
Yeah.
They just make sure you're not going to kill yourself. And see you later. And people walk out there and go, because I've had clients say this, oh no, the shop did a fit. I'm like, well, tell me what they did. Oh, they, checked my saddle height. And, I was like, that was just a bike size. And they're just making sure you're able to pedal the thing. And so I think the biggest is just people not getting a fit. It's one of the, I think it's one of the best ways to get, whether it's more performance, free speed, free power, or just more comfort if you're just somebody that wants to enjoy riding their bike more. Getting that fit. And I recommend you every 2 to 3 years, or if you get new equipment, had an injury, it's worth coming in, just getting checked out to see that everything's still working well. But I would say not getting a fit is my number one.
Yeah, and I would say too, you mentioned like new equipment. I think it's actually more critical now than ever to get a bike fit before you get new equipment because of the way that everything's integrated with, cables are integrated and stems and bars are sometimes integrated, and you've got to like select all of that before you even purchase the bike. And that's like one of the biggest nightmares as a bike fitter is when someone comes to you and they've got either proprietary components or integrated components, and you're just like, I'm very limited with what I can do today because it's just, there's too much barrier to make adjustments now. It used to be super easy. You could swap bars, you could swap stems, you could swap everything basically other than the frame on the spot. And it's just gotten way more challenging to do that in real time. And yeah, like you mentioned too, a lot of times, they're stocking these bikes with too wide of bars. And if you don't know that ahead of time and you get something that's fully integrated and in too wide, that's just going to be a big challenge to correct that. And, after the fact.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I did do fits in a shop, but I actually preferred just to do them in my own studio.
Sure.
Because it takes that pressure of like, I need to sell them some new bars.
Yeah. Yep.
But I'm with you. I mean, people come in and as well engineered as like Canyon bikes are. I mean, I've had people come in and I'm like, these handlebars are I don't know what to tell you, but these are too wide. This is causing a lot of your problems. And I just hate to have to tell them, yeah, you bought this new bike and now you need to shell out another couple $100 to get the right handlebars. Where if you called me before, we could have done some assessments and I could have steered you into, this is what you want to be looking at.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's number one. Sorry to disappoint you, Drew.
Darn. Well,
no, I think that's actually what the people need to hear.
That actually was better than that was better than any of the things that I was thinking of. I think I've sent probably 10 people to Silent Bit, and not even people that I coach necessarily, but because it's to get a bike fit is usually better in person. I don't even know if I'm sure there's a way you could do it virtually, but probably wouldn't be near as good.
during COVID, because I had a studio here in town, and then COVID hit, so I shut that down. And I toyed around with doing some virtual stuff, but it really only works if I worked with them before. And so I've seen them either ride or seen them in the stand.
That makes sense.
So I've had people say, "Hey, can you take a look at this video?" And it's just hard.
Yeah.
Because they don't get the right angle, or I want to be able to walk all the way around them.
Yeah.
So it's tough, I think. But if I've worked with them, I can often even just talk to them on the phone and say, "Tell me what's going on. What are these measurements? Well, have you tried this? Have you tried that?" And we're able to do it that way. But someone that I've never worked with, I don't even think I would do it unless I could see them in person.
Yeah. One of the things that scared me about the, because I considered the same thing. I had clients that reached out during COVID and things like that, about doing virtual fits. And I don't know if you do this or, whether it's recommended, but a lot of times when I'm performing a fit, I don't actually tell them what the adjustment is that I'm making.
Nope.
I just want to make the adjustment and get their feedback on it.
Yep.
But you can't do that with the virtual fit because they have to be the one to physically move and make the adjustments. And to me, that I don't want to say it empowers them too much, but I don't want to encourage them to then thereafter go and make their own adjustments, because now they might know that bumping the saddle back 5 millimeters makes this sensation go away. And if they feel that sensation again, they're going to, and it creates a snowball effect. So that was one thing that I didn't like about the virtual fit idea.
Yeah. And I'm like you, they can see that I'm working on the saddle or I'm, doing something, but I don't tell them what I'm doing because I don't want to bias a jury.
Exactly. Yep.
I want them to just give me their real-time feedback. And it's funny, there's times where you can just see it in their face, the adjustment you make, and they just go, oh. And especially when you get those really immediate reactions, okay, that was the right thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't tell them either, because I do want that unbiased feedback of that feels better, feels worse, doesn't change anything.
Sure.
All right, want me to pull up these questions?
Yeah, sure. Let's hit a couple of questions here.
Oh, let me find them. So we posted this on the Instagram for Ignition. We got a couple questions here. One in regard to crank length. Opinions and thoughts on the short crank arm craze, which I don't know. I mean, I went from 172s to 165s last year, and so I'm in the trend. I did the trend, but for good reason. Totally get it from short-legged or statured riders, but how about for average taller riders? Should a 6'2" rider spend a ton of cash to go from 175s to 165s or shorter because all the pros are? I work in a shop and a ton of folks are coming in for short crank upgrades. I've read the research, but not super short, but not sure that super short makes sense for all these riders, but I could be wrong.
My general, and this is true for almost any new revolutionary thing, I want to go back to understand, what are we trying to fix? Are we just doing it because Tade's riding short crank arms now, and look how fast he is?
Yeah.
It really, I want to know what the problem we're trying to fix. Is it that, I've got compromised hips or something that I need to address? And the answer is shorter crank arms. The data show, it used to be that you want the long lever. If go as long as you can, that's the way you produce power. That's been debunked in studies to show that going with shorter crank arms doesn't really change your ability to produce power. You can see that with people like Tade, who can go to whatever he's riding now, 165s or 160s.
Yeah.
But The one thing I will say in the switch is it is going to change the way you pedal.
Mm.
And so if you're someone that's used to kind of like, I ride with a couple of people who I think they're just trying to blow out their knees. They're constantly riding at 75, 80 RPMs. You go to shorter crank, it's going to speed up and there's going to be an adjustment period. And so you got to get through that period of adjustment before you can really assess, well, was that a benefit to me or not?
Mm.
But I would start with, what are you trying to solve for? What are you trying to fix before you just say, I'm going to go to 165s?
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah, the reason I switched, and DJ was the one that convinced me of it last summer, but for these longer races that we're doing, and for context, I'm not a super tall guy. I'm 5'10", so pretty average height and width and all that. And I was on 172.5s because that's basically just stock what comes on most bikes. I'd never really double questioned it or whatever. But when DJ was talking about it last year, he's like, the longer these races get, the more that your increase for knee pain or knee injury goes up, because now you're doing more and more pedal revolutions every time you ride, and if your training volume's going up, same thing. And so by going to a shorter crank and not forfeiting any power, you kind of minimize that risk of knee pain if that were to flare up from the ultra high volume training that guys like me and him are now doing to try to increase our volume for these gravel races. And I switched, and it was one of those things where I was like, whoa, this feels way better. Like, it was almost an immediate thing. Like I put them on, and it feels weird the first time you ride them, and then the week after, I hadn't got it on all my bikes, and I went and hopped on my road bike, and it still had the 172s, and I think I made it to the end of the neighborhood and was like, nope. And I went back and got my other bike with 165s, because I was like, I preferred it at that point. And so I think that's a good indicator that it was a good swap.
Yeah. So, and just to explain it, I think a little bit more where Dylan was coming from as far as like mitigating knee pain through all the, pedal revolutions, is with a shorter crank, you're putting your knee through less range of motion.
Yeah.
So there's not as much flexion at the top and extension at the bottom, because of your pedaling diameter is just smaller.
Yeah.
So by putting yourself through less range of motion, there's just less chance for overuse injury by, pushing those ligaments and tissues and tendons and everything kind of to the extreme ends of what the range of motion is.
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of is a craze because Tade did it, but I also think it is a good thing. I mean, it's depending on what your goals are and your size and all of that. Like, I'm glad I switched. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if there's not a particular problem you're trying to solve, and you have access, whether financial or whatever, trying it, there's something wrong with trying it. And you may find, like you did, oh, this actually works for me.
Yeah.
But you should stop and ask that question. Am I just trying it out
Correct.
to see if it works? And then what am I going to do if it doesn't work? Well, I'll go back. Or no, I'm actually addressing a problem. And so the answer is a shorter crank arm.
Yeah, and there's implications by swapping your cranks out too. You have to make the corresponding saddle height adjustment, or saddle position adjustment, I should say. So if you're going to shorter cranks, you have to raise your saddle and maybe even adjust the fore and aft a little bit to get that same, similar riding position. And effectively what that does is lowers your bars respectively. So there's corresponding adjustments that you should make. So if you're someone that doesn't have any pains or ailments or complaints as far as your position and overall economy on the bike, and then you make this crank arm adjustment, you might find, if you're not making the corresponding other positional adjustments, that you start to experience issues. So you're inserting something that potentially could be a good thing, but also opening up the door for other opportunities for ailments and fit concerns if you're not making those other adjustments. And like I said too, with the way bikes are built now, sometimes those other adjustments are more challenging to make than they used to be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a great point, because I think a lot of people think, oh, all I did was change my saddle. And like, well, did you think about rail height? Did you measure the two saddles? Because you've now because millimeters matter, all of this stuff is connected. And getting back to my number one, I mean, that's the value that bike fitters can bring, is to say, we have to look at all of these in total, not just this one thing, these new bars, this new saddle, different crank arm length, because they all do work together in a system.
Right.
All right.
All right, Drew, let's do one more.
One more. Oh man. All right, here.
Did you want to do the one of why I'm so cool?
Yeah, the very first comment was, Michael, how do you manage to be so cool? No, I think this one's good. We already talked about stack height. Yeah, okay. How does he balance fitting the bike to the rider versus helping the rider fit to the bike, like through strength and flexibility work to hold a more aero position?
Oh, I love that one.
Great.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one.
Because I think one of the biggest advantages of getting a bike fit is that education component. And so a lot of what I'm doing is not just assessing how they fit on the bike, but I'm looking at how do they pedal? How are they, moving when they're on the bike? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, it's easy, it's riding a bike. I rode them as kids, but then they don't really understand how their body's powering this machine. And so I love the educational component of a bike fit, is to help people better understand what their body's doing, how it works. Part of that is, we do the early part of the bike fit is let's look at your mobility. And so if we find, they've got their hamstrings are super tight, well, that's going to be something I'm going to put in my little prescription that I send to them, is I'll say, you need to spend some time, working on your hamstring flexibility or your hip flexibility, doing core work. I mean, people don't forget how much of our stabilization, especially on the bike, is the core. And there are adjustments we can make. I'll tell people, you're going to feel this in your core. Because it's changed the way you're having to support yourself. And so give it a few days, but I want you to start doing some, low back mobility work, do some core work, because you're having, that's a challenge for you right now. But yeah, that educational component and giving them things they can do, not just fitting on the bike, because that's just part of it. The other part is, are there other things from a form standpoint, how they sit on the bike, and helping them understand what that looks like, what that feels like, so that they can then replicate it on the road. Because some of the adjustments are truly form. Like your saddle looks good, your saddle height looks good, but you tend to flare out one of your knees. I have that issue. I had a bike fit a couple of years ago, and they're like, "Do you always flare your right knee out?" I'm like, "I didn't even know I was doing it." But it wasn't a fit issue. It was just a form issue. And so it was just, going back and doing some pedaling drills so that I could get that knee to track more straight and forward.
I think I asked you that question when I got a bike fit, and you said if it wasn't causing any pain, then don't worry about it so much. But maybe mine was just slight.
It's probably slight.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my knees, I think, tracks in a little.
Yeah. That's not I mean, it's either they come in and go out, or they go, typically the ones you see that kind of go out and back in. First question I want to know, do you have hip problems? Or I want to look at their hip flexors. Are they tight? Because it's just, and sometimes it's also they're carrying a little too much weight, and their legs just can't get around their lunch muscle, as we call it.
Yeah, this question actually brought up something that I think is important too. Is, when an athlete comes in looking for more of like a performance fit, so they're really trying to optimize their position for best overall performance. It might take time to really get to that optimal position because of some, deficiencies in strength or imbalances in musculature or, lack of mobility or whatever it could be. And sometimes as a fitter, you have to just say, this is the best we can do today.
Yep.
But if you go home, work on these things, come back in 3 months, 6 months, and let's assess again and see if we can make some, more adjustments to get you in a little bit more aero position, because we'd be doing a disservice if we just said, all right, well, we're just going to put you in the most aero position and good luck with it. Right. Like if
Yep.
we can clearly see that their body cannot conform to that position, so it's almost like, I just thought of this, like, maybe there's like an offering or a package where it's like the performance package where it's like, I'm not going to charge you necessarily for 3 fits in a season, but maybe we can like charge you for like a one, performance package for the whole season. And you can come in, 2-3 times as you're making improvements to yourself, so that we can make some of those adjustments. Cause, and I think that's a huge mistake that probably a lot of athletes make if they're just setting up their bike on their own, is they just go for the extreme and try and conform to that bike. And it's like, it takes time to get to that, position. So that's where I think the guidance of a fitter and that's where I think this question is really, really helpful is to just consider, what are your overall goals? You might have long-term goals, but you need a short-term solution due to, some deficiencies.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, the example I gave with my daughter is a good example in that
Sure.
I couldn't put her in the position she wanted to be, that I also knew was going to be more aero because we had to work on mobility. One of the ways I've handled this, getting to a package, I love the thought of a performance package, but if we get to a point like, let's get to, this is good, it's an improvement, it's not quite where we want to be, I'll then move over and not charge them. Like, let's say they want to come back. Let's come back in 6 months, reassess. I just do an hourly rate and just say,
oh, sure. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not going to charge you the full fit because we'll probably only need 30, 45
an
minutes.
Hour. Yeah.
Yeah, or an hour. So I say, here's my hourly rate. And then I'll charge you whatever percentage of that time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yep.
So they don't feel, because what I'd hate for them to do is leave and be afraid to come back and say, hey, I need another, because I don't want to shell out another, few $100. I'm like, no,
Right.
I want you happy. I want you happy on your bike. And if you've made improvements on flexibility or whatever, let's just spend the 30 minutes to tweak and keep it
Exactly.
going.
Yep.
But now I can market it as the performance package.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty good. All right, we're gonna wrap it up from there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Michael, this was great. I appreciate you coming on. It's a fun conversation, and it's a really important one for all of our athletes. We can talk endlessly about training, but if you ultimately are not comfortable and have good bike economy, then all the training in the world could be useless if you can't get the most out of yourself due to some bike fit issues. So I think it's super important that everyone knows that bike fits are for everyone. They're not just for the elites or just for the beginners. It's everyone in between can benefit from a bike fit.
Michael,
Absolutely.
you're in Louisville and North Carolina. Like, if people want to get a bike fit with you, where do they live, or where are they allowed to live?
So if they want to get a hold of me relative to bike fitting, go to stage22performance.com.
Okay.
We are building a house. I own about 98% of a house right now in Western North.
It looks amazing.
Yeah, it's actually the Belgian waffle rod, Asheville, runs right by our street.
Awesome.
So we're in Western North Carolina, but we are keeping a place here in Louisville, and we'll be back and forth. So if you live in Louisville, I can do a fit here. If you're in the Western North Carolina area, I'll be setting up shop there as well. So if you're in Asheville, Hendersonville, even Greenville, that area, I'll be doing fits there. So
awesome.
Great.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you're staying here.
Yeah,
in Louisville.
Louisville's such a cool town.
Yeah,
and we've been here since Actually, since Marcia and I both graduated from college, so 88. A lot of great people. Love the bike scene here. We've just got such a good network that we'll always have a foothold here.
That's cool. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Again.
Thank you guys for having me on. I love the conversation. It's great to talk with other coaches and bike fitters.
Yeah, we'll have to get you next time. We can talk about some coaching questions and stuff, because I'm sure you've got plenty of knowledge to share there as well.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
All right. Take care.